Hi, everyone. How are you doing? Thanks for joining us in session 18. My name is Renee, and this is my colleague, Erin. And we are colleagues for growing educators locally based here in Los Angeles, California. How many people are watching from the West Coast?
Woo!
I can see by your hands raised. Awesome. Thank you. How about the East Coast?
Woo!
All right. And of course, Mountain and Central, we don't want to forget about you. So make sure you join along with us. We're looking forward to your questions and your comments and your celebrations in our Twitter feed. You can see our hashtag, we're session 18. We're really excited about this topic. We chose to talk about it with you today. Erin and I are staff developers, and we're in the field a lot with educators like yourselves. And we think a lot with teachers, thinking a little bit about how does this partnership thing work? And so we're going to spend a little bit of time today giving you some ideas that hopefully are going to be confirming with what you're already doing, and then hopefully you feel like perhaps you can try some things. And we would love if you could tweet along with us this session, like ideas that you've had that we can think along with you and for the community. So it's interesting to think a little bit about, first let me talk to you a little bit about how this session is going to work. It's a huge topic and not a lot of time, so we broke it down into 3 stages. So we're going to think a little bit first, our first couple minutes, of how do I get started with partnerships? And then the middle section of our presentation will be how do we kind of build that I've got the foundation started. Then our third part will be like, how do I push kids and thinking about partnerships? And we'll talk a little bit about just a few tips that you might try. And then we'll take take you into some classrooms to see a little bit of kids trying this work. And then we'll hopefully end with kind of like some tips and problems to perhaps avoid. So let's think a little together about the idea of partnerships. It's so interesting to think about partnerships because we're thinking this morning about partnerships in school, but every time I think about partnerships, I'm actually really thinking about life, because I think a lot of times life work really is schoolwork and schoolwork really is life work. And so I wanted to encourage you, or let's think together this morning in kind of our warm up, this idea of like where and who and when and why do we have partnerships in our own personal lives? So in other words, think a little bit of like, who are the Batmen to your Robin? If I think about my life a little bit and I think about all the different types of partnerships I have in my life, I think, okay, I've got my life partner, right? And so when do I lean on him? I've got my business partner. And I know specifically my business partner, Jessica Martin, she is really good for when I need a little pick-me-up, right, when I'm feeling down. I've got my writing partner, Gravity, who I can lean on for almost anything, and really I know she's always going to be non-judgmental, right? I've got my running partners and my triathlon partners, and some of them double up at the same thing. So it's interesting to think in life for a moment. So if you guys could let us know, you can tweet to our session, when and who and where and why are the partners in your life, and how do you rely on them?
All right. So let's get it started. So the big question might be, how do we get this going in our classrooms? And in order to get kids to see the benefits and authenticity in the partnerships, we first have to lay a good solid foundation. And so we can't just have them trying to take over the world right away, like our Pinky in the Brain. And yes, I did just put Pinky in the Brain on the screen. So what are some of the things that that we can do to get this up and going right away at the beginning of the year? So one of the things that we might be thinking about is, how do we get partnerships matched? And so a good rule of thumb is, ultimately we want kids to be as close to ability matched as possible for a couple of reasons. One, we're trying to lay this foundation of building comfort with each other. And two, we're also thinking about, we're coaching into several aspects of partnerships. We're coaching into their conversational level. We're coaching into the content of what they're talking about. And we're also coaching into their behaviors. And so if they're close to ability match, then chances are they're going to need around the same thing. And so it allows that space, if they're ability match, to work on the things and progress in their partnerships together. And it also creates efficiency for us as teachers, because then, you know, chances are if that one partner needs something, the other partner is going to need the same thing. And so it helps us to create that efficiency in terms of our coaching work. So another thing to think about is the management of the partnerships. I think that's always like the million-dollar question, or the million-dollar thing that we think about as teachers, is how do we get this organized? And so there's a couple of different things that we've seen out in the field. You know, once we have partnerships established in terms of long-term arrangements, then we might be thinking about where in the room might our partnerships be meeting. And so some teachers have little maps, you know, cute little magnets with kids' names on it, or a little post-it so that they know who their partner is, but then also where might they be meeting. And so I think it helps to think about the time of day that you're working on partnerships, but also what the purpose is. And so if it's during math, you know, where might your kids be meeting so that the transition time might be minimal? Are they going to be having a math partner sitting at their table? Same thing with reading or writing. If kids are all over the room in their reading spots, then logistically, what's going to happen whenever it's partner time? Is their partner in close proximity to them? You know, do they have to get up and go across the room? So we have to think about things like that, because, you know, if the whole goal is to get kids to get into their partnerships right away and have productive conversations, then we want to minimize the transition time. We want to minimize any distractions that might happen en route to our partnerships. Okay, so in terms of the actual partnership, let me pull this back up here for a second. So in terms of the actual partnership and big categories that we can initially be thinking about, you know, we want to teach kids ways to get themselves organized in order to have these productive and authentic conversations. And so we might teach them, like, even if it sounds like simple things, like how do we sit with each other, and how do we decide who's going to share first so that it's not taking 10 minutes, you know, to rock, paper, scissors, or however that might go. Where are we going to put our materials? And not only just where are we going to put our materials, but what materials do we need to agree to bring to our partnership? And then a second category that we want to get up and going in the partnership is the talk. So how are we going to start to give them or feed them a menu of options of how we can talk to each other? And so initially it might be very broad or generic terms that everyone can access, just so that they can try on that language and see how it goes. And then the third category to think about is, you know, let's bring in our listening and speaking work. How do we listen to our partner, and how do we show them that we're engaged in what they're talking about? And so you know, it might initially start with, you know, how do we just show our partner that we're listening, so that as we go deeper into our partnerships, then it becomes, how am I listening to my partner, and showing them that I'm responding to it. But then what do I want to do with whatever it is that they're saying? But before we get there, it's how do we just first listen in? And then the second thing to think about is, not a second thing, but another category, I guess I should say, in terms of management is, then how can we get more talk across our day? So what are the structures that we have in our classroom? And what I mean by structures, or where are the different opportunities that we can get them to practice the behavior and the talk and the listening work that is required in a partnership. So here are some possibilities. So it might be, hey, let's think about that you try it section, or the active engagement part of a mini lesson. It also could be there in that independent time after your reading or your writing workshop. It also could be during interactive read aloud. It could be during shared reading. And don't forget your content time. It also could be in your math, your science, and your social studies. Okay, so we're going to take a look. We're inviting you into one of our classrooms here in LA. And no, it's not real time. We've captured some partnership work on film, and we wanted to share a little bit of it. And the first video that we're going to take a look at, let's look at it through the lens of this is the beginning of the year, and this is a reading partnership. And you know, putting our teacher lens on it here for a second, we want to be thinking, okay, when I listen into kids' conversation, we want to listen into what they're talking about, the content of it. We also want to listen into how they navigate their conversation back and forth to each other. And then we also want to observe, take a look at what their behaviors are. And so just set yourself up to look at this video through those lenses. Behaviors, how they're talking or what they're talking about, and what they're listening and speaking or back and forth together is. So let me pull this up. There we go. All right, so let's take a look for a couple minutes.
I'm going to check with you for just a second, Erin, because I think we have the view wrong. We're just seeing the viewer for your PowerPoint, but we're not actually seeing the slide right now.
Okay. She's just seeing, they're not seeing the slide, they're just seeing the viewer. Okay, so let me go back. All right, let me just try this another way here and make sure we can get it up. Let's try this. Bear with us for 1 second, please. We're having a little technical difficulty. There we go.
Looking good now. Once you get to the right, yep.
Okay, there we go. All right, so here we go. So let's remind ourselves again of the lenses to take a look at this. So let's just look, see what they're doing with their behaviors, their talk work, and their listening and speaking.
Because all the people were yelling that to keep it a white school.
All right, so let's stop there. So let's think for a second. So in this particular video, we can look at it from the lens of the teacher and be thinking, like, how could we support this partnership? But before we do that, we have to look and say, what is it that they are doing? And so some things that we can notice in terms of their behaviors is we notice that they're like kind of peering over to try to see what the other partner is talking about in their text. And the book is far away from the other partner. In terms of their talking work, we notice that they are retelling a section or bits and pieces of what they had just read. And so they're just staying there with that retelling work. And then in terms of the navigation of their conversation, one talks and then the other talks. And so we notice that they know something about taking turns, right? But they need more support with how to link the work that one partner is doing to the work that the other partner is doing. So what would that sound like if we coached into this partnership? So I think first, let's think about our coaching moves as teachers. So one is we have to be very careful that we don't turn into a third partner. We don't want to hijack their partnership. We don't want to rob them of their opportunity to be a functional partnership, right? So one of the things that we might do is we could whisper into one of the partners, right? And so if we think of the categories that we just assessed, one possible move could be, hey, tell your partner, hey, move your book closer to me, I can't see it. And that way it gets that partner to communicate and say, hey, like this is something that we need to be doing here. But I don't need to jolt them out of their conversation to do that. I can get one to tell the other to do it on their own. Another possibility could be just to give a quick gesture, right? So I can just look and say, move the book. And again, I'm not jolting them out of their conversation. I'm just giving a quick lean prompt of, hey, this is a behavior that we really need to be thinking about. Or it could even be like, grab hold of the book so that both of your hands are there. A third option could be, I also could just leave an artifact, right? Like I could jot something on a Post-it, maybe a quick sentence frame. So, you know, in that particular case, we noticed that they were just retelling their spots. So perhaps I could write down on a Post-it and say, this part made me think, and drop it off. And when they stop their conversation, then they have something that they could try and use together. Okay, so let's just think about our coaching moves there. Or actually, let's just kind of name back like the things that we worked on there with that partnership. We listened and we assessed. And we thought of those three categories: behaviors, their content of what they're talking about, and how they navigate that conversation. And then we thought about how we can quickly coach into it by whispering in, by giving some quick gestures, or by leaving a quick artifact. And so if we think about starting partnerships at the beginning of the year, you know, I think as teachers, we have to think of what our bottom lines are. And if we have a clear sense of where we're going to go as we go across the year and where our kids are, it helps us to make that decision of what might be our priorities. So for a lot of teachers, coaching into behaviors is a big priority at the beginning of the year, because students tend to need some reminders of, hey, we're going to scoot closer to our partner, and hey, where is the work going to go? Like, so that we both can take a look at it. And so that might be a top on your hierarchy of setting partnership work up and going. So, so before we head into the next section, you know, I think it's always helpful to think of some predictable problems that might arise, or predictable questions that we find in our classrooms. And so one of them is, you know, there's many different things to coach into in partnerships, right? And it's just like whenever we look at a student piece of writing, or any kind of student work, and listen to kids read, right? Like there might be 1,000 things that we want to offer support with, because we always have that lens, right? But we can't coach into everything all at once, right? We have to pick spots to use as our entry point. And so one possibility to think of, and I already kind of touched on this, is think of the multiple opportunities that you have across your day to coach into partnerships. It can be on your math time, it can be on your science and social studies time, your read aloud time, right? So it gets kids to think about the purpose of their conversations and what they're doing, but also allows us to pick a focus. So for example, I might, in my read aloud across the week, really be working on how to make eye contact with your partner, so that transfers into independent partnerships during reading time, as a quick example. Something else to think about too is if your priority or your big goal is to help push conversations and giving kids a menu of things to talk about in their reading, then perhaps at those other points of our day, we can chart up the different language frames or different pieces of thinking that came out of the work that we were doing at those other parts of our day. So another predictable question, or a common question that we get, is how long should our partner time be? And, you know, one, you have to think about your purpose, right? You have to think of the time of day in which you're working on partnerships. So for this example, let's think about partnerships during our reading or our writing workshop. So you want to, I think a good rule of thumb is to think that the time of, or the partnership time should match the stamina of their conversations. And so at the beginning of the year, conversation stamina tends to be a little bit lower, right? Because we're building a menu of things, or a menu of options of how kids can talk to each other. And so initially we might consider keeping time very short. So our setup work might be, okay, so partner A is gonna go first, You have 1 minute. Let's try saying, hey, here's a part in my reading or in my writing that I'm really proud of. Try that out with your partner. Go. And then putting a time limit on it so that we're setting that expectation of, hey, you're going to have a time frame of talk with your partner, but also try on some different pieces of language that, hey, you have 1 minute to get this going right now. So you have one focus, one clear focus to work on. You know, and we want to always be aware of the time that kids, or what the stamina of their conversation rather is, because we just run the risk of, if we give too much time, we run the risk of them going off topic, and then they might think that that's okay. Oh, right. So just take a quick second and do some tweeting. So pull out your Twitter, pull out your phone or your iPad, or whatever you might be tweeting off of today. And just be thinking, what are some of the things that you have found in, if you have started partnerships in your classroom, what are some other things that you have found to be successful? So just take a second, tweet. Our hashtag is at the bottom, the Ed Collab Gathering, number 18. Okay, so we have a question. What do you do when there are students who are particularly resistant to collaborating? It's a great question, also a very common question. So I'm actually going to combine that question with also thinking about other kinds of learners in our classroom. So we can think about the resistant collaborators, and we also can think about language development. And not to say that those two go hand in hand, but we can think of the category in terms of differentiating for them. So for both of those categories, one thing that we can think about is perhaps attaching them to a triad initially. So our resistant learner, or our resistant collaborators rather, can still be part of a productive conversation. And maybe with the thought that, hey, if they hear how a conversation goes and they hear how two partners stay on topic, they might say like, oh, okay, now I feel comfortable, or now I feel safe. I hear how this is going, and I'm not asked to initiate it on my own, but I can jump in and do some of that work. That could be something. Another thing too could be, think about why they might be resistant. Like, what's the research that we're putting into finding out what's happening with it? Is it a language thing? Like, could we offer some sentence starters or sentence frames? I've seen some teachers in partnerships, or in this particular case, maybe a triad, having some sentence starters or thought stretchers on, what's the word? Shipping labels, so that they can just peel it off or point down on a list to help get them going with conversation. Because sometimes, those who are resistant to collaborating, it could be we just, initiation might be an issue. So I think big box there to think about is, what is the research that we're putting into finding out what's getting in the way of those students wanting to be part of a partnership. So a second thing to think about, and this goes with both of those categories of resistant collaborators and also ELD learners, is perhaps we could take the context of what we're talking about out of text, get them talking about something that they all have in common. It could be things at recess, it could be, video games that they like to play, just so that they can see that they can be functional in a conversation and they can be successful in the conversation, because they do have context for the content in which they're working through together. Another possible thing too could be, or consideration, I'm trying to get myself to stop saying that word thing. So another possible consideration too could be, if you're pulling it back into text, think of culturally relevant texts, so that we're constantly thinking about things that are relatable to kids and things that they feel comfortable and can possibly say a lot more too. Okay, so let's shift gears and head into the second part of our partnerships. Let's get into thinking about now what. Like, once we have, let me try it this way. Let me pull this up for a second, because there we go. Beautiful. Yes, that is a brain holding some barbells. So this next part is once we have partnerships established and good behaviors and routines down, kids know what to expect or have some clear expectations for themselves going into partnerships. Then we have to think of how we're going to build the work together. And so this is a really deep phase where we might spend a big chunk of our year into. So if we think of what we're after, one of the first things that we're after is getting or supporting the increased stamina of the conversations. A second thing that we're after is pushing kids to have in-depth conversations and in-depth analysis in whatever it is that they're working on, whether it be math, reading, or writing. A third thing that we're after is we really want to be pushing the listening and speaking work. So we want kids to be able to listen into what their partner is saying and show that they're listening, right? Like by nodding their heads. But we want them to go beyond just, hey partner, nice work, or hey partner, you worked hard, because that can stop their conversations. We want them to listen to what their partner is saying and then add on or perhaps change directions of the conversation or perhaps linger on that thought or that idea a little bit more. And then fourth thing that we're after here in this phase is we want students to actively start to make decisions of where they want their conversations to go. And so, so we have to think again, there's a little bit of a build inside of this in terms of coaching moves from us. So let's think a little bit of how we can get there. So one thing that we can do is we can teach kids how to budget their time a little bit. So perhaps we could, let me grab this up here for a second. So perhaps we could think about teaching them to manage their time. So one option, one thing that we have seen out in classrooms is teachers offering support in terms of an agenda. So here's a sample. Let's just use reading partnerships for this particular example. So let's say if partnership time is 10 minutes, then perhaps kids could have 2 minutes of preparation. Hey, let's pull out our reading notebooks and our Post-its out of our books and think about the questions that we might have or the reactions or the observations of the work that we were doing in our own text and that what we want to bring to our partnership to share. And then perhaps take 2 minutes and do a quick puzzle retell where one person starts to talk about what they read and they go back and forth to piece it together. So one of the reasons why that might be a nice consideration in an agenda is that's something that kids like to do naturally, right? We want to honor that they want to retell their books, but we don't want them to be stuck there. We don't want them to only be doing that work in the partnership. And then perhaps there's a little space in their agenda to have some clarifying questions. And then the big work that we might want to do is have that spot in the agenda where they can have what we call the dig deep activities. So that's really where, as teachers, we can show them a range of possibilities of things that they can talk about. And one of the reasons behind that, and here, let me pull up some ideas for what we mean by some dig deep activities. Pull this up here for you for a second. So in this, we really want kids to spend the majority of their partner time doing work like this. And so some options for activities could be teach them to do some dramatic reading. And so we're laying the foundation here as, hey, you might find times where you want to work on the fluency in your books. And so dramatic reading is a nice place to do that, or a nice activity to help with that. Or perhaps we want to think more about our vocabulary work and our word attack and problem solving. So perhaps we could play a game called Guess My Word. Perhaps we want to really think more about our partnership, or not our partnerships, that's what we're all thinking about together. Perhaps we want to think a little bit more about our characters. And so maybe we act out a scene to internalize the work that they're doing. So point being, whatever your dig deep activities are, you're laying that foundation and you're teaching kids to think of the categories of work that they can be doing inside of their reading And so ultimately, and we're going to talk about this here in the next couple of minutes when we get to the push phase of partnerships, but we're helping them to identify the work that they're doing so that eventually when they say, hey, I need help with, they have a clear sense of those different categories. Okay, so let's take a look at a partnership. Another partnership. And so let's look at it through the lens of this build. And so in the build, well, actually, let me say it this way. So go back to what we were thinking about looking at, or when we were now doing some analysis work on the first partnership, we were looking at their behaviors, we were looking at their talk and the content of what they were talking about, and then we were also looking into their listening and speaking work. So this is a partnership who have behaviors and routines down, but we have to be thinking, what next? So let's take a look at this. Look through those three lenses, and then we'll stop and talk.
Things about her for me to really know the character really well to write about her. And right here, and then in like every story we need a problem. So right here on the sides, or also right here, I try to write down some problems so there could be like some action in the story. And then when I found the right problem, I just circled it and then I started drafting, and then I started getting a big story. So that's what you're proud of, your character. I feel like I will also go with my character. I did change her like a lot. And for my character to fit my title, I also had to change the title. I'm kind of proud of my title and her because first I named the bird of happiness, then the helping bird, and finally the lonely life. I feel like I named it the lonely life because that's what it's in her mind. She thinks she's lonely, even though she's not. So I feel like I'm proud of my character because she kind of is feeling how kids normal feel, like you think your parents are never having time for you. So I feel like that's what I'm proud of my character, doing all this kind of stuff that makes her seem real, like she was right next to you. What's your next step as a writer? I think the next step as a writer is like...
Okay, so in this partnership, you could tell that she was so proud. She was so proud that she was keeping that conversation going. So let's think of those three lenses again, right? Like their behaviors and routines were there. They're very organized. They have all of their writing work that's out there. And the one partner is naming back, the girl in the pink jacket, Nicole, she was naming back the work that her partner was doing to her, or the work that her partner was doing and talking about to her. And then in terms of the content of what they were talking about, they were definitely content specific in terms of the type of writing that they were doing. They were working on some realistic fiction. And we noticed that there's a good grasp of academic vocabulary in terms of talking through that, right? Now, next steps could be, all right, now we need to work here in the building phase of their partnership. Let's take what our partner is saying and add on, or let's take what our partner is working on and challenge it, or offer some support. Okay, so we have a quick question. How are we teaching into partnerships during all content areas? What do we do to make that bridge? Great question. So one possibility is to think about your purpose as a teacher. So in all of your content areas, think about what kind of work that you're doing. So for example, if you are teaching content through a read aloud in social studies, then perhaps your focus for that day or that week could be, hey, we really want to work on language frames or sentence frames to help us do the kind of thinking work that we're doing. Or perhaps in math, for a particular week, it might be how do we get ourselves organized with a partner? So I guess big box could be think about what you're doing in each of your content areas and perhaps pick a focus for what your kids need more support with. So again, we're bridging the research of what we see our kids need and tacking it into things all across our day. Okay, So let's move into thinking about the third phase of partnerships. Is once we have routines, pull that up. There we go. Oh yes, more brains and more funny pictures. So coming out of the building phase of our partnerships, this is the part where kids are now in control of their let's go back and fix this for a second. Bear with us. There we go. So you couldn't see what I was laughing at. All right, let's scroll through this here for a second. Back up. There we go. Beautiful. Here we go. So that's what I was laughing about. You gotta love Google Images. So here in the third phase of building and working on our partnerships is what we call the push. And so what we're after here is we really want students to extend their thinking in different capacities, because now they have control over, or they have experience rather, of the different ways that they can think and different ways that they can talk with a partner. And so now is really that part where we want to get kids to, and yes, that is a brain doing yoga, get students to be intentional with their goals and also think about who they want support from. Okay, so this is, I think, really the part where it ties back to what Renee was setting us up to think about at the beginning of this session is, you know, in life, we know who to go to when we need certain things. So think about all of the different partnerships across our lives, right? This is exactly what we want our readers and our writers and our mathematicians and our scientists and social scientists to be thinking about. Right, we want kids to be very metacognitive about what they're working on and what their intent is, and then go out and seek a partner that's going to help them with that thing, with that aspect. All right, so one of the things that we can do as teachers is really to be thinking and helping kids to establish and name the purpose of what they're trying to do, and help them see that they have lots of options. So for example, in writing, if I know that I'm really working on making sure that the heart of my story or the main message of my story is being woven in all across my piece, then perhaps I send that over to, you know, Susie, because I know Susie has been working really hard on that too, and she always, you know, gives me good feedback on that. So I'm going to ship it over to her and say, hey, can you help me think about this one thing? So it really helps kids to be specific and name the specificity in which they want their feedback. It's hopefully going to feel very different than, hey, here's my piece. Can you just read it and tell me what you think? Versus, hey, I am really working hard on this thing. Help me with that. So let's take a look at a partnership. We're going to go back to our friends that we were just looking at in the building phase of the partnership, so we can see them a little bit later on. And so again, let's set ourselves up to look at those three lenses: the behaviors, the content of what they're talking about, and how they navigate their conversation. And so for this one, let's particularly have our eyes set on what is it that they're talking about, and how are they pushing each other.
Because I have a lesson planned out, like, even though your mom doesn't work with you all the time, but she still loves you. But I was trying to put details in there to make you like think about that during the story. Because right now it doesn't really sound like there's any detail to it to make you think that that's the lesson. Well, what I kind of did, so I might want to help you out, was when
Okay, so let's pause there. So you could hear just from their language that this partnership is definitely in that push phase. They both went to each other and said, hey, so this is the way, or this is what I've been working on, and I want you to read my piece and say, hey, did I accomplish that or not? And then what support can you give me? And so now this partnership is very independent in the sense of they can keep themselves productive and busy throughout their whole partnership time. And they have a very clear focus for each other and for themselves. So if we think about the work then, or our role as a teacher, you know, go back to what we were thinking about in the beginning phase of this, of how to get things started. You know, we might offer a lot of lean support of like whisper in, you know, or whisper in, or gestures, turn and talk, and try this. So if we think now about the push phase, ways that we can support them aren't necessarily going to be quick. So we might think about supporting them through a conference. And oftentimes we think of conferences with individual kids and what they're individually working on. But in this particular case, we can be coaching in, or set up a specific conference for their partnership, because we know what this partnership is working on and what they're thinking about, and we can take them one step further. All right, so last part to think about before we wrap up is, you know, oftentimes there's a question of, okay, that sounds a little scary in terms of sending kids all over the room to go find a partner, because we've worked so hard to get them organized and situated in the room so that transition time isn't, you know, disruptive. So one thing to think about here in this push phase is, you know, we're really pushing kids to be independent and being really aware of what they're working on and why they're working on it. And so if things don't go well, then perhaps a nice move for us as teachers then is to say, all right, you're really reflective readers and writers and thinkers. So let's talk about this. Like, what went well? What got in the way? How can we fix this? How can we make sure that this time stays productive? So that it's not that, you know, this roar, here we come, you know, to tell you what you're doing wrong, but no, how do you problem solve this? How do you fix this? That's a big way of getting kids or pushing kids to do that, is to make them do it themselves. Be problem solvers. All right.
So I'm just wrapping up. Again, thanks for studying with us today. And we really do think that partnerships and just the idea of talk in classrooms is really important. And we like to say, kind of when we're working in the field, like a lot of academic work is really just life work. And if you think about we have one more question really quickly. On average, how many minutes do kids get to spend in conversation daily? That's a really good question. And we would say the person who's doing the talking is the one doing the learning. Yep. One of our good friend, Gravity Goldberg, kind of charged us with that a couple of years ago. So now we say that a lot. And so I think quiet classrooms are sometimes, you know, I'm a little bit nervous about quiet classrooms, quiet compliance. Mm-hmm. So we would say get kids talking a lot. So, you know, direct and explicit instruction and get kids talking throughout the day as much as you can. I would say start with 2 or 3 minutes so kids get a really good feel. You almost want kids to say things like, I didn't get a chance to say that thing to my partner, so they look forward to it tomorrow, and then build. So imagine your minutes kind of crescendoing over the year. And give yourself permission to let it be messy, because really thinking is messy, so talk is going to be messy at first. But if you think about one of the biggest questions we have as teachers is, how do we get kids empowered to feel that they can be critical thinkers, independent critical thinkers? And Erin and I want to argue today that talk is one of those tools that we can push kids to really be critical thinkers and powerful thinkers and independent thinkers. And we think talk through partnerships is a really great structure to try that with. So thanks again to Chris and the Ed Collab community. And thanks for studying with us in your PJs, although you may not be in your PJs anymore. And we hope to hear from you on social media how partnerships are going. And just to think a little bit about kind of starting them whenever that may be, building them and kind of pushing kids to kind of, and ourselves really, to see the benefit of talk in our classrooms. Thanks so much, and we look forward to studying with you in the future.
Beautiful, thank you.